Due to increased internet censorship, truth is under attack like never before. And the truth about the controlled demolitions of the World Trade Center towers on September 11th is just as important as it ever was. To stay updated on our work, make sure you visit ae911truth.org and subscribe to our email list. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can receive alerts when our videos are posted. No algorithm can silence the facts. By subscribing directly to us, you make it impossible for the censors to stand between you and the information you need to know. Visit ae911truth.org right now and stay connected.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and you're going to notice on the graphic behind me when it doesn't get whited out a little bit that I have 9/11 on a television set. Yes, I know televisions don't look like that anymore, but that is pretty cool. It actually looks like a real TV is behind me. But the reason that I have that is because 9/11 is getting talked about a lot more often these days on the mainstream news, and when certain figures appear, such as RFK Jr. I know we covered it the last time McKee was here, but it's been covered also on podcasts, such as when Tucker Carlson came on Joe Rogan. So I have an all-star panel here tonight to talk about these developments, opine, give their thoughts on how 9/11 is slowly, very slowly, breaking through in the mainstream. And when I say 9/11, of course, I'm not talking about the official story. The terrorists attacked us because of our freedom. I am talking about evidence of controlled demolition on that day that AE 9/11 Truth has been going over for years. And of course, in other areas of 9/11 as well. But let's get to the panelists. All right. First one we have is Adam Syed. He is a longtime 9/11 Truth activist. And last year he wrote an excellent article for us called "How Many Architects and Engineers Will It Take?" Criticizing the media's coverage of our issue. He's also a musician and a great guy to talk to when you want an analysis and perspective on this topic. He's going to be joined by Director of Marketing for AE 9/11 Truth, Jeff Long. In his early life, he worked for the Air Force, putting out propaganda for Uncle Sam. He's a good guy now. He's working with us. He's talked about that on the show in the past, and he definitely has a lot to say about the media coverage of September 11th and on other topics. And last but not least, we have Craig McKee. He's been a journalist in Montreal for over 30 years, covering news and entertainment, won 8 provincial and national weekly newspaper awards. He's written for AE 9/11 Truth, as well as for his blogs Truth and Shadows and Thought Crimes and Misdemeanors. And now he's even got a podcast that he calls Truth and Shadows, which you can watch on Rumble and YouTube, and of course on his site, which is Thought Crimes and Misdemeanors.substack.com, all together in one word there in the address bar. Guys, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Hey, Andy.
All
Thanks
right.
for having us.
Thank you for coming on tonight because, I could give my own commentary on these developments, and they're trickling out slowly. These incidents where RFK Jr. is called out for having said anything sympathetic to our cause. But our audience already knows what I think about all of this stuff. I want to hear it from you. Now, I got to give some backstory, though, to our audience, because this might be the first video of 9/11 Freefall that they have ever watched. Some time ago, I don't know how long ago, several months, RFK Jr., he's running for president. His father ran for president. Didn't end well for him. But he was on the show, Peter Bergen podcast, and Peter Bergen had confronted him about some of his 9/11 leanings, talking about World Trade Center 7, which collapsed at 5:20 in the afternoon on September 11th. Of course, when I say collapse, I put air quotes around that because we know it didn't collapse. It was brought down in a controlled demolition. But let's just refresh our audience for about a minute and a half and play that clip.
You mentioned 9/11. The official explanation of 9/11 you buy?
Which is what?
Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11.
I don't know what happened on 9/11. I mean, I understand what the official explanation is. I understand that there is dissent. I have not looked into it. I haven't examined it. I'm not a good person to talk to about it.
Well, I mean, so there's doubt in your mind that Al-Qaeda was responsible?
Well, I don't know. I know that there's strange things that happen that don't seem...
What are the strange things?
Well, one of the buildings came down that wasn't hit by a plane. So, it wasn't Building 7 or Building 10.
That collapsed because two of the world's biggest buildings collapsed on top of it.
No, they didn't collapse on top of it. My offices were down there. My offices were closed.
So one of the buildings next to the Trade Center...
No, there's pictures of it collapsing. There's nothing collapsing on top of it. I mean, listen, I don't want to argue any theories about this because all I've heard is questions. I have no explanation. I have no knowledge of it. But what you're repeating now, I know not to be true.
To clarify, yes, I could have been more precise here. The government's official report found that Building 7 was hit with debris from the North Tower. That impact caused fires, which led to the building collapse. It's very well documented, and there's nothing strange about it.
All right. I love it when people who don't know anything about the issue try to sound authoritative. But we got Craig's thoughts on that clip last time. So I'm going to start with Adam Syed. What's your thoughts after hearing that entire thing?
I'm honestly pretty underwhelmed by RFK Jr.'s strength at speaking on this issue. He and others need to quit waffling and saying, I don't know what happened. I personally find it a little bit difficult to believe that he is unaware of AE 9/11 truth. And I have a feeling that he probably even knows about I'm sure that somebody has made him aware of the University of Alaska study, if not him himself. So he's obviously, I think he's being very coy and playing politics when giving the vague, I don't know what happened stuff. And then when he did actually talk about Building 7, I think that he could have, argued it with better wording, better phrasing. But at the same time, I'm glad. I mean, I think that anybody who is bringing attention to this issue at all should be commended. I have massive disagreements with him on other topics, but that's obviously for another conversation. So those are my initial thoughts. I actually had heard that before, I don't know, a few days or weeks ago when it first came out. And those were my thoughts then too. It was like, come on, mention AE, mention the 3,600 architects and engineers, mention the UAF Fairbanks study.
Well, the thing is, if he wants to be president, he should know a little bit more about September 11th. It was a big event that happened in the last 20 years. It's still affecting our world today. And if you're going to talk about this or shed any doubt about it, you should know some of the facts around it. Again, I like RFK Jr. I don't have any issue with him. But if I ever ran for office, and of course they would come after me for this issue, I would go at it whole hog and not hold back. So it's almost like give it your all or don't give it at all. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you can kind of see that they're dipping their toes in. And I could see why he's kind of skirting around it being a presidential candidate. So at least we have somebody that high up that's bringing it up. But it would be nice if he was a little bit more specific, the way that Jimmy Dore was, with the amount of knowledge that he has about the background specifically on Building 7. So, I mean, it was interesting to hear when he interviewed Dr. Halsey on his show a couple months back, how long he has been into this, which was really surprising because, I've been pushing content his way for several years through our Twitter channel. So at least I know that some of that stuff's getting through and the people that he's had on the show. And the same thing with Tucker. all these guys recently, and it seems like in the past 2 years where this just kind of came about, that seemed organic from some direction somewhere, but it's just strange that it's taken 2 decades, and then all of a sudden these popular pundit types are all of a sudden focusing on the one thing that makes the most sense. Because, you know, you can talk all day about the towers, and then people have fallback issues for what they can explain away for something like that. But when it comes to Building 7 falling in the afternoon, I mean, I'd like somebody to bring back up and ask Amy about her instance being filmed at Building 7 coming down and seeing her run away. And, you know, I know she talked about it briefly once, maybe.
Amy Goodman.
Yeah, on her show, Democracy Now!, and had been questioned about it in some of the audience stuff. The meetups that she had in the late 2000s. So I'm just more interested in where this is coming from the past 2 years, trying to track that down to see why all of a sudden, or just things have just gotten so bad and we're this close to World War III that people are finally sounding the alarm and need to talk about something that got us to this point. You know, we wouldn't be dealing with all the things that we're dealing with now had we solved and had a new investigation after 9/11 that got us into the Iraq War. So something's going on. I just think people are feeling it in the zeitgeist, or maybe it's just the fourth turning. Maybe we're reaching that point. People are just waking up.
Well, the MSM's getting their butts whooped. And I'm not saying necessarily by this show alone. I mean, yeah, we're not on the level of a Joe Rogan or anything like that. But those kinds of shows, and there's so many of them now, that, like, why turn on CNN? Why would you even do that? Just for a bunch of, psych med commercials and, propaganda. That's all you're getting from that. And the cable packages are so expensive. You can just pay for internet and get your news anyway. So why not? And of course, for the reasons that you cited there, the fact that we are a breath away from World War III, things are getting out of control in the world. Why not come out and start voicing the thoughts that you've been keeping to yourself for the last 10 years? Craig, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I don't remember what I said last time, but I definitely find that clip interesting, because I can certainly, as Jeff said, I can certainly see why somebody running for president would not want to take too firm a stand on this issue, because of course the mainstream media is going to jump on him, just like that interviewer was just sounded like he was just wanting to pounce on him for saying anything out of place. Like, that's what he would get from a lot of people. And so suddenly that would be the big story of the campaign for Kennedy, would be like, he's turned into a conspiracy theorist or a, whatever. So I mean, it's regrettable that he has to kind of be so careful in what he says about that. And he's certainly not the first politician that has reached for the, I don't know all the details explanation. But I guess I would sort of see this as a glass half full kind of situation where he did push back on what the host was saying. The host said, like, nonsense, 2 buildings fell on it, so of course it's going to fall down. And he said, no, that's what you're saying is wrong. I was there, I had Banoffs down there, and that's not what happened. So I think I would be inclined to take that as a positive, more of a positive than a negative, because he was, and I wonder, when it comes to, I mean, there has been so much talked about, the 9/11 does seem to be getting into the mainstream media more in the last few months. And I wonder if it isn't kind of like a case where, after a certain amount of time passes, it's almost like the establishment doesn't, they don't care as much. It's like, well, it's been 20 plus years, so yeah, you can say what you like, but because we've got other deceptions we've rolled out in the meantime that we're now trying to baffle people with.
I was going to say, if something like Plandemic were made 5 years after the pandemic ended, then it would probably, I don't think that YouTube would have necessarily felt the need to delete it like that, as this. So, and I also would say, like, for example, when Loose Change went viral in 2006, that was already 5 years after the event. And of course, back in 2001, YouTube didn't exist yet. But I can pretty much guarantee you that if YouTube had existed then, and if somebody had made a Loose Change type video and uploaded it like in October of 2001, around the time that we were going into Afghanistan, YouTube absolutely would have taken it down, saying that it violates terms of service and getting in the way of our war on terrorism.
Well, if I can just add to that, that's interesting. I wonder if it isn't a case where when something happens very close to the event, and when the establishment, entrenched in establishment position, hasn't maybe solidified as much, that's when you can maybe say some things. And then once it becomes solidified, then there's a whole period of time where you can't. And then when enough time passes, maybe you can start again. Like I can't help but think about the like the Kennedy assassination. In the 1960s, it was quite openly discussed in mainstream media about the question of whether it really was Lee Harvey Oswald, whether it was really was a lone gunman, or whether the government had involvement. I mean, it was, it wasn't quite as closed off then, but it became closed off after a period of time where it was very difficult to even have that conversation in the mainstream media. Now today, it's been, in that case, it's been 60 plus years. So I just wonder sometimes if it isn't like once a certain amount of time passes, then they're not so worried about it. I don't know, but although that host certainly was very, very touchy about defending the official story, despite the host not really knowing what he was talking about.
Well, this is what I want to get to, and I have my own theory as to why they do these. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play a clip. Now, folks, this is going to be about 4.5 minutes. I think it's worth watching. We're going to have some commentary afterwards. This is RFK Jr. in the last couple of weeks. I don't remember which date. But he's being interviewed by former Governor Cuomo's brother, and I don't know his first name. I know Rush Limbaugh used to call him Fredo, and then some guy thought that was his name and said it to him in public, and they almost got in a fist fight over it. But
you don't mean Chris, do you? You mean Chris Cuomo?
Is it Chris Cuomo? Okay, yeah. Limbaugh always called him Fredo as a joke, and then somebody actually thought that was his name and said, "Hey, Fredo," and the guy was, oh my God, he lost it when he said that. But well, let's go ahead and play this with him talking with RFK Jr. There's a bit of an edit in the middle so we can keep it focused. But let's just sit back and enjoy.
I do think there's an upside to you in this little bit of this firestorm that you're in right now, is that you're getting a lot of people taking a look at you that weren't. And yes, a lot of the write-ups are playing to your biggest weakness, which is that you spout a lot of conspiracy think, whether it's deep state, whether it's 9/11, whether it's vaccines, you are painted with that brush. And I know you in the campaign think that this is water under the bridge. We've already addressed it. But I think that you should greatly rethink going there, because all those write-ups today called you a conspiracist. And I think that there are a lot of people in this country that want another choice, but they're not going to vote for a conspiracist. So what do you say to that suggestion that whether it's 9/11 or the deep state or vaccines, that you believe wacky things?
I don't know what you're talking about, 9/11. I don't recall saying anything about 9/11.
It came out of the Bergen interview.
I'm called a conspiracy.
Came out of, you know what I'm talking about. It came out of the Bergen interview.
I do not know.
Well, in the Bergen interview where you were saying you're not sure what happened. You know what I'm talking about, Bobby. I'm not. You know me. I'm not trying to be sneaky about it.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not trying to be coy, Chris. I think if you go back and look at that interview or any interview, I never voiced a conspiracy theorist. I may say, I don't know what the facts are, or I'm willing to question government orthodoxies, but I never advanced a theory about what happened on 9/11. I can tell you that.
Criticism, because you're better off addressing it than having other people assume your answers. On 9/11, here was my concern about it. After you did the Bergen interview and people started to process it, they said, hey, you are having Bobby Kennedy on, and he says he doesn't know what happened on 9/11. I went back and I read the whole transcript of the interview. I believe that that's not a fair reading. You did say, I don't know what happened on 9/11, but I do understand the government's reckoning of it, and I don't have any reason to not believe it. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that you don't know whether you believe what the government says happened on 9/11? This matters.
Well, I don't, listen, I've been around long enough that I question everything that the government tells me. And I think people who don't question what the government tells them are not paying attention. When I was a kid, the government didn't lie to us. And 80% of Americans in 1960 believed that the government didn't lie to us. And then a lot of things happening. One, my uncle's assassination.
Right.
And, the Warren Commission report, which a subsequent congressional investigation came to a completely different conclusion than the Warren Commission report, a congressional investigation that was much more thorough. Then the Pentagon Papers came out in 1973 and showed that the government had systematically lied to us about the war in Vietnam. And since that time, I think you and I grew up in an era, Chris, where we expect the government to lie to us. So I think part of being a citizen in a democracy is to question authority, to question everything. Trust in the experts is not a feature of science, and it's not a feature of democracy. It is a feature of totalitarianism, and it's a feature of religion. But we live in a democracy, and it's science, but our policies have to be science-based. And so we need to question everything. And when new facts come, we need to question them again. And so, I'm not going to say.
Understood, but you're not pitching an alternate theory. You're not pitching an alternate theory of what happened on 9/11.
No, I've never pitched.
Okay.
I've never pitched an alternate theory.
There's a lot in the air accusing you of it. I want to give you the opportunity to address it, and you have. That's what we do here.
So, Craig, when we were on last time, we talked about how every time somebody might be sort of sympathetic to our cause, they're dragged out on some kind of mainstream media platform, whether it's Deborah Medina going on Glenn Beck or Ron Ball going on Glenn Beck. It used to be Glenn Beck a lot, where they would be put on the spot and asked to defend, either throw the 9/11 truth movement under the bus or to state categorically they think 9/11 was an inside job. It almost reminds me of some kind of interrogation you'd see in a movie about Nazis when I watch these. So you're not positing some alternate theory about 9/11, right? It's almost like they're just, grilling these people to do this. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, it's so typical of what the mainstream media do. It's even the hint that somebody might have a different idea about what the sequence of events was is like verboten. What Kennedy said was so safe, and so he just stuck one toe into the waters to say that, just basically to state a fact that the building didn't come down the way the guy was describing. And it's even being that careful gets him labeled a conspiracy theorist. And there's I don't know if any of your viewers will remember, but I wrote a piece for AE a couple of years ago, all about the conspiracy theory label and how it's used by the mainstream media to stifle dissent, and basically with a lot of I think I listed in that article like something like 18 different tactics that the media use, and I just did that. You can see them all. Just Google conspiracy theories and read the articles. They're so the way I put it at the time was it reads like it's from a template, and it just isn't believable that this is all just randomly happening. It seems like they're all kind of reading from the same playbook, and this Chris Cuomo was just like he was ready to just get him on any slight technicality, and I mean Kennedy said, "Look, I didn't put a theory forward," which he didn't. He didn't put any theory, but just the idea that to do so makes, like, in other words, you don't evaluate someone's evidence. You just, well, if you're putting your toe into being a conspiracy theorist, well, then we reject what you're saying out of hand. I mean, the media has done a hell of a job in brainwashing people into thinking that that's true.
Well, yeah, and they're trying to equate being a conspiracy theorist with being a bigot or a rapist or something. And I don't think it's taken in people's minds. It's been overused so much that people are proud now of being a, quote, conspiracy theorist. Adam, your thoughts after having watched that and watching RFK Jr. Get grilled on national TV?
Yeah, well, I thought that, Craig was just mentioning that the first one on the Bergen, that RFK was being very careful there. Well, if the whole point of the MSM is to try to intimidate them to being even more careful, I think that they probably succeeded, because I thought he was even more careful in the Cuomo interview. That being said, when it comes to the whole "I don't know what happened on 9/11" thing, that being said, I was very glad that he brought up his uncle's assassination, and specifically the fact that there was a second investigation many years later that came to a totally different conclusion than the first one.
Which we never hear about.
It would have been interesting, by the way, if YouTube had existed then. It would have been interesting to see if they might have changed their context window after the second investigation. Probably not, because I don't know what it says now for the JFK assassination, but like with 9/11, there's that context window where within the very first sentence, they're letting you know that it was done by 19 Muslims with box cutters.
But it is interesting, actually, just the fact that he did say as much as he did about the Kennedy assassination. I mean, that's pretty
safe to go there.
What's that?
It shows that it's safe. He must think that it's safe to go there.
Exactly. It's safe to go there. And you notice you didn't get any from Cuomo about what he said about that. So that kind of is where I'm coming from when I say that I think a certain amount of time passes, and then it becomes like, okay, yeah, you can talk about that. But so they focus all their kind of disinformation efforts on more recent stuff. I mean, I'll say one thing. Just about last thing I'll say on it is that I think that I like the fact that Kennedy said we should always question what the government says. That's always be the case. He didn't get 9/11, but saying that was important, I thought.
Jeff, your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say that thinking about that, we've got, even though it's been 2 decades, we still get hammered on. You can see how touchy this part is. Tucker went into depth about the CIA's assassination of Kennedy. I think most people, anybody's got like half of a brain cell left in a synapse that's firing. And I can say that publicly, even though the mainstream will still attack you for it. But that was, I think, one of the things that pushed Tucker off of Fox News at that time. A couple other things are going on too, but he was just so sure about it, and people shared some documentation with him. But yeah, and we all know, and I bring it up every time, is how YouTube specifically in January 2019 called us out. It's like medical misinformation, flat Earth stuff, and they specifically said discussing anything about 9/11. It's just anybody questioning any of those things. They're going to start downranking, shadow banning. So even 2 decades after, that's still such a hot topic. And then they have to throw us under the bus with the rest of the stuff that's going on. But a certain amount of times, it seems like it can go by, and then you can start bringing up some of this stuff. But, you know, I've seen recently in the past couple of weeks, people questioning, because we're about to get, you know, we're basically in a quiet, cold World War III about to go hot. But people still can't, when you bring up anything questionable about World War II, and now we got in with Pearl Harbor, and that being a false flag and setup, you know, then people come out of the woodwork just going, what are you saying about our government? It's like, really, that much time has passed and you still can't see how everything lined up to get us into that point. I mean, there are just still certain triggers, certain memories that people have that still have to hold on to something patriotic. It's just after enough time, as you get older, you just start to question things. And I mean, he was right. It's just any authoritarian just saying, you know, let us handle it. We know what's going on. Don't question anything. That's when you know. I mean, you can basically tell when something is true on YouTube when you see the first thing underneath there. YouTube has to throw in an either Encyclopedia Britannica or a CIpedia entry telling you, you know, the one thing that they might have talked about in the show, but here's the official story, and we got to tell you what it really is. I mean, all my friends do that. They're like, here's one to watch because the officialdom has tagged it and has to let everybody know that here's the real information, and it's pre-approved by the government, the networks, and everybody else.
The suits.
No, let me jump in for a second. I have to plug my computer in, so I'm going to disappear for just a moment, but I'm going to throw this out there. Would RFK do even better among the populace if he was more bold in questioning 9/11 and learned some more facts about it and we're spouting them during these interviews?
Well, I think that, I mean, look at whether you like Trump or not. What he did was he was just the guy in the room who was just going to talk about whatever he wants to talk about and just throw people under the bus and make fun of people online. I think that was the kind of thing that people were ready for, somebody talking back against the establishment. And, you know, we'll find out how things play out, you know, what was really going on. But I think people are just ready for somebody who's real, who is just going to not be the typical politician. And you could see it with what RFK was doing there, is that he has to go into this. I mean, he's so used to doing it, and plus he's a lawyer, that the people have to walk that fine line and tiptoe around in eggshells and try not to say the wrong thing. But somebody like Trump, or you say like Milei in Argentina when he was running, people are just ready for hearing somebody who is real, that's just going to throw it all out there and not care. And you just got to be at a certain level to where you can't be cancelable, so that you can get that information out there. So that's where I think most people lie, is that they look at the bottom line and how is this going to affect me? I'm not going to go that far.
I would add, I think Kennedy, because of what's been happening the last, year or two, it seems like there is a little opening there. It's a little safer for people to start kind of nibbling at the edges of the official story. Even the fact that Jimmy Dore did it, like 5 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago, I always got the sense with him that inside he had doubts, but he wasn't going to go there. And I'd almost decided that, like, I'd forgive him for that, because he's having such a positive effect in so many ways that I kind of hated the idea that he would get sort of ridiculed. But now he actually is going there, and Russell Brand has dealt with it a little bit, and Tucker Carlson, and it seems like there's an opening there. And so maybe Kennedy could have been a little bit bolder, but I can certainly see why he wouldn't want to go in, whole hog at this point. But And just one quick point I wanted to add about the about Pearl Harbor, because that's a very good point you made, Jeff, about how it's still a forbidden subject for a lot of people, even though it happened, 80 years ago or whatever it was. I think maybe what's different between Pearl Harbor and Kennedy is that there really wasn't a movement to expose the truth about Pearl Harbor. I mean, there are a couple of famous books that have been written about it. Day of Deceit is one that comes to mind. And Stinnett was the author of that one. And so he kind of revealed the fact that they were completely aware that this event was going to take place, and they wanted it to take place to have an excuse to get the U.S. into the war. But it didn't seem like there was a real movement of people that was on that. And maybe that's why it's still kind of a forbidden subject after all these years. I don't know.
Well, I have a theory on this, is that, like, if somebody, let's say you come into a job and you're taking over for some guy who retired and you're seeing the things that they did, it makes you look better than, to sort of, do new stuff and improve. And like, they can acknowledge, if you're the person in that position, you can acknowledge the wrongdoings of the people before you a lot easier than you can yourself. So, like, people who lived during an experience, let's say it's JFK, the people in the media, if they didn't do their due diligence and cover all of these anomalies that were that came up over the years, it's sort of like their own personal failure, and so they're going to be less likely to want to acknowledge that and visit that than in talking about some failure of the media that took place 20 years before that. So it's like, okay, all those people that were around when Kennedy was shot, investigators, reporters and stuff, they've all retired, moved on from this world, most of them. We can talk about where things that they got wrong and didn't pick up on now. But 9/11, hey, that happened to me when I was, just starting out in my career, and I was on TV, and, we did our best on that one. I don't know. What do you guys think of that theory?
Well,
anybody jump in?
That brilliant.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, each one is different, I guess. I mean, to jump back to Kennedy again, and maybe I'm just stalling for time by doing this, but while I think about the 9/11 implications, but there were talk shows where people openly discussed in the 1960s about whether the Warren Commission report was bogus or not, or whether, I remember William F. Buckley Jr. Having in his show Firing Line, having Mark Lane on, who was a major Kennedy researcher, and them kind of hashing it out on television, on national television, and with 9/11, that never happened. That never happened, and I'm inclined to think that the media, it's just kind of wall-to-wall propaganda now, whereas at one time it seemed like there was some propaganda and some truth could get through. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question about 9/11, so maybe I need to let somebody else answer, or because I lost the thread of what the original question was. I think.
Well, think about think about the context. No, go ahead, Adam.
Well, you were asking, Andy, you were asking me what we think of. Could you like, in just a few words, could you sum up that theory again?
This is a failure of media and government. Any conspiracy cover up, it's a failure of our fourth estate. Nobody wants to acknowledge their own failure. It's easier to acknowledge the failure of the guy before you, because I'm here, I'm doing better, but not your own. Do you think that plays into it?
Well, I have always thought that if the media had actually done its job with 9/11, if it had actually followed through with some of its initial questions, and which I think it was probably very difficult for them to do at that time. Maybe they were afraid of being anthraxed, But I think if they had done their job, not just on 9/11, but with like the Iraq War and really rigorously questioning the weapons of mass destruction instead of just acting as mouthpieces for the Bush administration, I think that there would have been, I think that there might have been more trust later on, maybe in instances where maybe the mainstream media actually might have told the truth on something, kind of a boy that cried wolf type of phenomenon. I mean, now, me personally, I remember that when I woke up to some of the facts in 2005 about being a truther, or about not about being a truther, but about the facts of 9/11 at that time. I remember feeling kind of disappointed in myself that I didn't question it right from the beginning. And I remember thinking to myself, well, maybe they've gotten away with this, but maybe if we, the people, start questioning things right from the get-go in the future, maybe we can prevent some of these lies. And I have to say, if that was the goal of the 9/11 truth movement, to get people to question things from the get-go instead of waiting many years to question it, then I would say that the truth movement has been wildly successful, because now any event that happens, you've immediately got alternative explanations within minutes.
Yeah, I think with 9/11, it trained everybody to it trained a whole generation of armchair researchers, and with the access of the internet at that time, and burgeoning, and even sort of prior to social media, everybody's just running around with the access to the internet and able to find old videos and start pulling stuff together. We have to remember too that the day of, some of the media pundits did not get the talking points right away, the way that Jane did with BBC, Jane Stanley. I mean, she had all day to get that script to talk about Building 7 falling before it actually did. But if you remember back to the major networks, they were all talking. They were the ones who literally gave us the controlled demolition theory that day, because they all discussed about the buildings coming down, how that looked like a controlled demolition. And I think that people forget that for the most part. They they don't remember the day of, and when people were bringing up some of these things and asking questions. And then within a couple, I mean, we had within the first couple hours, certain people were showing up on the networks pushing the bin Laden theory. They had to get that out there super quick. But for some of the other stuff going on,
I understand. What I can remember from some folks that had done some in-depth research on this particular angle of 9/11, on Fox News, bin Laden's name was mentioned for the first time within the first 60 seconds of the second plane hitting. There was a terrorism expert on the phone with the host and mentioned it right then and there.
Well, I think wasn't Ehud Barak of Israel, wasn't he on television in the first 15 I can't remember whether it was before the second plane or shortly after, but he was on there within minutes on network television, pointing the finger at bin Laden. So that's a whole other area. But I wanted just to make a mention, because I think you used the word failure, Andy, and I mean, I think with the media, we can't even talk about the media failing anymore, because the media seems to be completely compromised now. So what it's actually doing, it's actually succeeding very well in presenting state propaganda. That's what its role is. That's what it does, and it did very well where 9/11 was concerned. I think whoever said that, on the day of, the story isn't always locked in right away, and that's why we got people like Dan Rather and Peter Jennings making comments about that, gee, that looked awfully like a controlled demolition. They didn't know what they didn't get the script at that point. But I can't help but think, I did an interview with a guy, I don't know how many people know a guy named Jonathan Kay. He's a Canadian journalist who wrote a book called Among the Truthers. And he interviewed Richard Gage, he interviewed Barry Zwicker and other people in the truth movement. And it was a hit piece, essentially. And I got a chance to interview him. And I remember him saying that, and I've heard other people say this too, that with journalists, that, if journalists had an opportunity to break this big story about 9/11, if there was something if there was a story to be broken, they'd be tripping over each other, trying to break it first. If 9/11 was really an inside job, the media would be very competitive in trying to get that story first, which to me seems like a complete propaganda point. We've seen, how many examples have we seen since then? Hundreds, where there was an obvious story to be told and the media didn't make any attempt to tell it. And the Iraq War just being one example. I mean, there was virtual unanimity about that war. Even while hundreds of thousands of people were marching in the streets, there was virtual unanimity among the media, and to the point where Phil Donahue, got his show canceled basically for daring to question that.
Jesse Ventura.
Did Jesse get his show canceled?
He did too.
And he had one in the fall of 2003. Originally, he was going to have a show 5 nights a week on MSNBC, and I was really looking. I remember when he made the announcement on the Tonight Show, because I was really excited. I was a huge Ventura fan at that time, like 2003, when I was doing my master's degree. And when he announced I had been reading his books, and so when he announced he was going to have a 5-night-a-week show, I was really pumped. And he also said on that interview, he goes, I had a statewide radio show, and that set my popularity up politically to become governor. Now I've got a nationwide TV show. So I was,
all right. Let me go ahead and play Tucker Carlson now, because I want to make sure that we get that in. So tell me if you guys cannot hear it.
One thing that we can remember at this point, and I put it in our Mockingbird article and did a graphic for it. Operation Mockingbird used to be just such a massive conspiracy theory, even though Church Committee hearings in 75, 76 exposed it. People still have no idea. Yet now these paid CIA operatives in all the different networks and the newspapers they don't have to hide it anymore. They're paid pundits on all the major networks. You have nothing but CIA retirees, FBI people, Homeland Security, people from all the different intelligence agencies are now spokespeople and paid for pundits on all these different networks. And then they go right to them whenever something happens. So you get the official take coming from the government mouthpieces.
Right. And just to tell our audience, we had some trouble playing the Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson clip for our guests here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make that video available on our YouTube channel with a slight edit, and we'll put that in the description here under the show so the audience can watch it, and we'll get your reactions out there from the supporters. But yes, Operation Mockingbird, where you have CIA embedded with and intelligence officials embedded with the media. How is that happening in a free society? And I have my own theories. Of course, I can't prove this, but if they're doing this with the media, have they tried this with congressional offices and other people in prominent positions? Of course they have. Of course they would.
Of course.
So, you don't
get into a place of power without being compromised. So if somebody is there, they've been vetted. They've been, like whenever the new representatives for Capitol Hill get elected, say November, I think it's the first week of January, before they get sworn in, they get taken on a junket, 20 or 30 of them, to Israel for 2 weeks, paid for through AIPAC's other organization, because they got in trouble for doing it. So they get the free the free tour, and then they wind up getting the Epstein treatment or P. Diddy, to where they're being compromised on film. So they come back and they do the right thing. So, anybody that's high enough up in government, you just know that they're compromised. I mean, we see what just happened with Mike Johnson the other day. Gets taken away to a little room. Next thing you know, he comes out going, yeah, we need these warrantless FISA searches, and we got to give this money to Ukraine and give away all of our money to Israel. And this government overreach is something that's needed. It's, he was basically given the Bill Hicks tour. Let's show you the Zapruder film from a different angle.
Right.
See what you think
An
about
angle
it.
you've never seen before.
Yeah.
Well, here's my question. Now, it's a weird situation. I never the deception has gone on for a long time, even before any of us were born. However, the internet gave us a window into it, and so now we can have shows like this one where we talk about it. There are so many other shows just like this that talk about it, but you still have a mainstream media where we get people like Chris Cuomo there, Fredo, representing truth. Right. And we know that they're anything but truthful. We know that they are just mouthpieces, propaganda. We have a situation where our money is being printed and sent overseas to these other countries and wars that the American people don't want anything to do with. People don't trust government, whether you're coming from the left or the right. They may have their own different take on who they think the bad guys are and what the solution is, but they do not trust government anymore. How long can this situation hold on this way? Will the center give? And if it does, will that be good for 9/11 truth or bad? Do we want more chaos or less chaos from this insanity that we see? And whoever wants to chime in, jump right in.
Well, we want more control. We want less control. So if less control means more, I don't know if I would say chaos, but I would say more unpredictability and more free speech and freedom of thought. We definitely need that. And, I think you're starting to see, without dipping into the partisan presidential debate or anything, but I think we're starting to see that the public is starting to kind of go its own way. And it's not necessarily following the establishment narrative in a lot of ways. And it's not quite so keen on, people are not quite so keen on having their point of view molded for them. And they're I think the faith in the mainstream media it's hard to imagine how much lower it can go. I mean, does anybody believe the mainstream media? I don't know. I guess people probably do in unconscious ways. Like they may, like I know some people who are not 9/11 truthers who are, they've bought into the whole Ukraine thing completely, and how, Putin's the devil, and they don't seem to notice all the things the United States has done in terms of its interventions in different countries. So to some extent, that establishment narrative is still pretty powerful. But I see more kind of unpredictability in this, and people are. But at the same time, I sound like I'm arguing with myself here. But at the same time, on the internet, there's a lot more. Like, we're having this conversation, but at the same time, if you want to go and Google 9/11, you're not going to see 9/11 truth videos nearly as easily as you did 10 years ago. So they're trying their best to keep it under control.
With regard to the censorship, bringing up YouTube once again, one of the most egregious examples I've seen of the algorithm censoring us, of course, way back in the day, the preeminent academic scholar in our movement, the late Dr. David Ray Griffin, gave many podium lectures about 9/11. And they were all up on YouTube. And I think many of them still are. But they, in 2019, when they made that announcement, Jeff, that you were talking about, they manually went in and tinkered the algorithm so that now it's going to, like, if you type in David Ray Griffin 9/11 lecture with the default search filter to relevance, because there are these different search filters. There's relevance, upload date, and view count. And they've declared any 9/11 truth stuff to be, not relevant. So meaning that it should appear, 100 or 500 search results down. So right now, if you type in David Ray Griffin 9/11 lecture, the first result that I get is an interview with some other person named David Griffin, who was on the WTC cleanup site, and he's from North Carolina, and it's a local news interview with him. The second result is not a lecture from David Ray Griffin, but from some other random professor arguing that 9/11 conspiracy theories are wrong. So basically what's happening is we're doing our search, and if the algorithms were humans that could talk, they're saying, we can see that you are searching for videos that claim 9/11 was an inside job. So instead, we are going to offer you videos that claim that this conspiracy theory is wrong.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of
like, or I've also imagined, for example, back in the good old days of YouTube, imagine if YouTube was a physical place. Imagine if it was like a really large convention center, at a major downtown, and you've got like hundreds of these little video stations where you can watch a video. And it used to be in the old days that it was just an open-ended convention center room where you could just walk around. Now you go into there and you are greeted by a couple of corporately dressed people with name tags who say, how can I help you? Where would you like me to point you? I'm interested in 9/11 Building 7. Follow us this way, where we will show you, we would like to point you to this excellent video by our National Institute of Standards and Technology. I wish I had this quote. It's not the local institute or the state institute or even the regional institute. This is the national one.
Yeah.
It's so prestigious. They hired the brainiest PhDs from coast to coast and border to border, and they all converged at this national institute.
or perhaps popular mechanics as opposed to any other of the less popular types of mechanics. The most popular one is the one they're going to send you to.
In the popular mechanics, in their original article, and I think also in their book a year later, I think that they said that when they were playing the experts in the numbers game with experts, I think that they said that they interviewed something like 250 or 350 experts in the relevant fields. And,
wow.
and that was something like all various, aviation and everything. Well, the AE petition has 3,600 very specific experts, nary from the mainstream media. And like I said in my article that I wrote last year, when Jeremy Stahl wrote his article about the trying to get Spike Lee to cut his segment from the HBO series, he said that Lee, featuring both sides, featuring the spokesmen for the government NIST report, as well as spokesmen for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, said that was like featuring Holocaust deniers alongside the director of the Holocaust Museum. So I mean, it's amazing like how Orwellian things have gotten. I mean, I think that in some ways things are at their worst now with all of the corporates, once all of the big tech companies decided to say, no, we're not going to allow, the people to, have their own control of the internet. We're going to come in and use our corporate power to, clamp down and control the narrative. That's when everything really went south. I think ironically, the best days of free speech on the internet were the George W. Bush days.
Yeah, but people forget that with this open, free internet, the largest search engine on the planet is Google, now owned by Meta, and they keep changing their name. Second largest search engine on the planet is YouTube, part of Meta. We've been around the block so many times. We know how to to research and look for certain things. But the average person is going to go straight to Google and pull up something. They're not going to go, they don't even know that there are alternative search engines out there that are not connected to that same algorithm network that's purposefully set up with people inside and that amount of money to make sure that they give you the results that they want. So that's part of the problem for what you're just talking about and what YouTube talked about in 2019. If people if that wasn't the go-to, if it wasn't Google wasn't like an action verb telling you to do something, people would, and same thing with social media, using the same kind of search engine algorithms and tied back to Google. The average person doesn't know that Google came out of CIA funding, out of their venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel, as most of these things did. Same thing with between that and DARPA for FedBook when that came out. People need to start looking outside those parameters and using different search engines so they're not giving away all their information for free to these intel agencies, and start calling out the social media platforms too for the amount of federal agents that have offices in the corporate buildings, whether it's CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, NSA. Even when Elon did his purge with Twitter, a lot of those people are still there in these offices. So it's not like they've gone away. Just like we have former intelligence officials on the mainstream media, they've got these same people in the back end of these social media network companies doing the same thing and shadow banning people, tagging them for certain things, and making sure that their voice, including ours, cannot be heard. 2 decades in, so there's just a much bigger fight that we have to deal with, and you just got to go outside the fencing a little bit and do something else, do different kinds of searches and things like that. But people are typically lazy and used to routine, so they just go to the first thing that they're just used to doing. And to make the point that what we're talking about with certain people and generations, my father, for example, he questions me when I challenge anything that he sees on the mainstream networks. He's like, well, how do you think that you know this? It's like, well, it's because I do the research. I put in the time. I've been doing this for decades. And you got to remember, these people, these TV pundits that you see on here that are championing something that's just full of BS. Some of that stuff that you saw in the 80s was crap that your own son made during the Cold War, that you'd see something on TV that the Ted Koppel or somebody on Nightline, I remember that one specifically, showing something to help push the propaganda for some kind of war effort for something. And I was looking at the TV one night and I'm like, I made that a month ago, for the CIA at that time, me being Air Force intelligence in a joint intelligence facility doing Mockingbird kind of stuff, even though it wasn't called that, with the code names and things that they were using, but doing all this stuff at 18 years old, being roped up into it. And it was just a work project coming in, but I'm like, that's not true. And most of the stuff here is not true. And you just got to read through it. And that certain generation, we all know our elders, they come out of the World War II part of history, believing everything that the government was telling them. So we're still dealing with people from that age range who, if it's on TV or if it's in print, Washington Post, New York Times, it's true. But they're not going to go search out anything different on the internet and know some of this other information exists out there to challenge the narrative. They're just a generation that fought in these wars for good, and everything that the government said is true, and nothing could be different. Or the amount of people that they lost, family and friends and people dying, that's probably just too traumatic for a lot of people, and that's why we see that they can't ask these certain questions, because once they realize, oh, wait, our own government is murdering its own people and has been the entire time in its existence to further political motives, gains, and anything to help fund the military-industrial complex. That's too much for people to handle.
Yeah,
that's too much trauma.
Yeah, people. I think they feel too that if they take that plunge, that it almost puts them in a position where there's an expectation of then sort of doing the next thing. And once you sort of are willing to admit that your whole worldview was incorrect and then that you've been misled all this time, then it's kind of like, then, gee, do I have to do something about this? Like, so people it's like subconsciously they stop short of going there, because, if they say like, well, we just, we don't really know. There's a lot of mystery about these different things. Then that way there's no obligation on their part to actually do anything.
Then you got to be us. Room for one more.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, I understand that. Yeah, I mean, I understand that. And it's not like you need to go do something overnight. It took me a little while to get started with 9/11, and I didn't want to commit to it immediately because it sounded crazy, right? But the people on the internet, the crazy people, made a lot of sense. And then I learned they weren't crazy. They were actually right. And so, you kind of develop plans, and everybody does things in their own way. Some person might do a show like this one. Another person might write. Another person might go and do a tabling somewhere of evidence. Everybody is different, and everybody just needs to do their own little part. And that's what a movement is called, a collective effort. And that's how we're going to win this. My hope is in the younger people. There's young people right now. They were born after September 11th. And they're used to a completely different existence than we are used to. But the idea of questioning their government has been in the background of their lives since they came into this world. And so I think it's going to be a lot easier for them. And I think that we, through shows like this, if they happen to catch it, and other shows, we're going to influence that future, and we're going to see these seeds that we've been planting all of these years sprout. And I also think, too, it all takes is one little thing to happen, something that affects people at home, in the pocketbook, whatever, to really change their outlooks. Let's say it's an economic collapse. Let's say the United States gets itself into a war and there's a draft reinstituted. Oh my God, I have to actually go fight this thing, because I don't think these smart weapons are going to work as well as they think they are. And suddenly, hey, I don't want to die. I'm going to question this. And by the way, I've heard people talking about 9/11 too. Maybe we should look into that as well.
Another thing is that could trigger things is just one or two of the right people having the courage to speak out at the right time. The example, I also mentioned this in my article, by comparison, was the case of Bill Cosby, and how he went almost overnight from, beloved cultural icon to pariah because of a few people who spoke out, which then triggered a snowball of many more people speaking out. And I just kind of wonder if there might be some kind of triggering event that maybe gets a lot more engineers to maybe go beyond just signing a petition and then going back to their regular life, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully, we're just shy of May. We're almost to a half-year point in 2024. I think we can all smell it in the air. We can feel that something horrific is coming this year. Their Director Ray he keeps saying the same thing, the way that they were saying right before 9/11, all this internet chatter, something's going to go on. I think we're going to have some kind of horrific terrorist attack that is going to, they need something that's galvanizing again, another PNAC kind of point. We're just ripe for it because the election part coming up November and how contentious that is. where we just sent all that money, we're funneling it overseas for money laundering to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel at this point. It's like they need a war. And if you look at the amount of Congress people who all of a sudden just started selling off shares of certain stock and are buying more into Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, stuff like that, that just tells you exactly where this thing is going. It's and they keep making these small changes because there's one here that I had on my phone that I forgot for the because they've been talking about pushing things towards a draft. They've started recalling retirees back to service, asking them now, hey, come back, and we need you guys in all these different 4 branches. So you've got retirees coming back to active duty. We have all of these, at least almost 11 million criminal illegals who have come across the border through the southern part, undocumented, these military age males coming in, and not to count the ones that the Air Force and the Navy has been flying into the U.S. for the past couple of years into the heart of the country, just dropping these people off. But one thing that they changed for selective service, for anybody who is in their 20s, you got to sign up, I guess by the time you're 25, for the draft, should something happen to come in, or you could be fined or in prison for not doing so. But one thing that they changed to selective service was this section here on immigrants. And it says, if you're an immigrant man living in the United States, documented or undocumented, and are between the ages of 18 and 25, you are required to register with few exceptions. So that should tell anybody part of the reason why we just have this huge influx in. We have the military at its lowest recruitment ranks. We're gearing up for war. We're sending all this stuff overseas and watching flight tracking software, the stuff that I've got and some other channels that I watch, the amount of stuff that we're sending overseas. It takes a while to set up a war in a different continent. It's a lot of assets to move. So it's going to get very bad this year. And then we have the World Health Organization and WEF and all these other trying to set up the specific treaties with nations that something happens, we're going to be the governing body to tell you what to do. Here's the lockdown scenario. You can't do this. Stop eating that. You need to, all the other things that are going on. This is just going to be a game-changing year. But I think if anybody looks up anything about the fourth turning, it seems like we're in that part of the cycle in this fourth part to where a ton of people are waking up. Some people are going to be prepared for what's coming. Other people are just going to be caught with their pants down. And, you know, we've been trying to inform people for 2 decades now about this one thing specifically. You know, when I was in DC for 8 years, I was doing everything regarding the Pentagon and that research, because it was like, well, we've got a whole group of people in New York and architects and engineers handling the towers. We live here in DC. Let's focus on what's in our backyard, Shanksville and the Pentagon. So there are just so many different facets to this thing that we've been doing it so long that we know, we can just all feel that something is coming and that there's going to be some kind of black swan event, because they're throwing everything at the fan right now, because it just seems like they're running out of time for some reason, and they just have to go all in at this point, put their cards on the table. And it's just kind of the weirdest time in history to be alive and watching all this stuff as it unfolds.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think we're all too old to be drafted unless they change the standards. But I'll tell you what, there is no way I'm going to go drafted and be in the Army. I am not getting out of bed and running. That is just not happening. And it wasn't happening back when I was 18 either. But in all seriousness, though, this is why we do this. And no matter what happens in this world, we're going to continue putting out this broadcast for as long as we can, bringing you the truth of 9/11 and any additional attached issues to it that 9/11 has affected. And I think all the stuff that we're talking about today is a result of the failure, or willful failure, Craig will say, of the media and the government to get to the bottom of this important issue. But guys, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall today.
Thank you for having me.
Hit that notification bell and slam the like button and subscribe. Thanks.
I don't know. I certainly, if you'd played that Alex Jones clip for me in 1999, I would have been, and I did see Alex Jones clips in 1999. And then in later years where he was talking about Building 7, and I was very offended. I was like outraged that he would be suggesting that there was something about 9/11 that wasn't above board, that there were, things we didn't know that were being hidden from us. And I was like mad at Alex Jones for saying that. I remember that really well. How dare you?
The Building 7 one is wild.
Well, it is wild. It is wild. I mean, I have all I know is 21, I don't even know what year it is, 23 years? Could it really be 23 years after 9/11? 23 years later. What's the justification for classifying any document around 9/11? There's no justification.
Well, the same justification in classifying the documents about the Kennedy assassination.
Well, exactly, 61 years later. Federal documents in a so-called democracy because they're lying to us. That's why. But 9/11, what is the justification for that? I don't know the answer. I really don't know the answer, but there is one. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's not methods and sources. You think it's methods and sources? Trying to protect their Saudi sources? I don't think so.
The wildest thing about Tower 7 is that if you just say it looks like a controlled demolition, people get mad at you.
Why?
Well, I don't know.
Well,
because I'm not saying that it is a controlled demolition, but I'm saying if you watch it, it looks like a controlled demolition.
But that happens all the time. Buildings catch fire and they just implode in on themselves. I think it happens every week, right? All these poultry plants and manufacturing plants that keep getting burned through fire. They all
it's the way it went down.
Yeah. So I say, why do they respond that way? And of course, I responded that way. And I think looking back, the reason that I did was because if you call that into question, you had to ask a lot of other really obvious questions you didn't want to deal with, and you might arrive at the conclusion that a lot of your most basic assumptions are false and that you've been had, and it's just too destabilizing maybe.
Right. Well, the real problem with Tower 7 is they go, well, okay, if it was a controlled demolition, how was that engineered? Did they just decide to do that before September 11th? And you know how long it would take to rig a building like that?
Right.
Or was it built into the building? And how would they know it would even work? And how would they do something like that? And how would there not be a record of it being built into the building? For someone to engineer
and where's
the
the sound
collapse of a
signature
tower
on the tape? There would be a sound of the explosions.
Yeah,
going
bang, 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 bang.
Which is a fair question.
Yeah, so a lot of fair questions. And has there ever been a building that experienced a tremendous amount of damage because two enormous skyscrapers fell right next to it, damaged it, and then massive fires started, and then there's diesel generators that are in the basement, so they have all this fuel, so they have this incredible inferno in the basement that weakens the structure. And is that why it collapsed? Maybe.
Totally possible.
Yeah.
A lot of building engineers disagree with that, as you know.
Yeah.
And they don't think that could have happened in the way you just described. I'm agnostic on it. What I know, because I don't know the answer, and I have no way of knowing, all I know is that there's no justification for keeping those documents secret that I can think of. And if there is, tell us what it is. No one has bothered because nobody presses. And it's, I'll add that to the list of outrages.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then it gives you this feeling of helplessness because there's so many of those. They just pile on. There's always another one.
Well, the U.S. government spied on me, broke